The House chamber was unusually tense that morning, the kind of silence that buzzed louder than shouting. Lawmakers were scattered across the floor, some whispering, others glued to their phones. But all eyes subtly shifted as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez strode in, her heels clicking like a metronome of purpose across the marble. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't waving, and she wasn't looking for a seat. At the far end of the chamber, Karoline Leavitt stood beside a cluster of Republican representatives, animated and loud. A few laughed at something she'd just said, and then she spotted AOC across the room. Karoline smirked. "And there she is," Karoline said, with a voice loud enough to carry, "here to defend another trillion-dollar climate fantasy, I presume." The smirk widened into a grin. AOC didn't respond. Instead, she veered left, walked past two aides, and without breaking stride, approached Karoline's desk. A thick manila folder was in her hand, bulging, annotated, underlined in red ink. Karoline raised an eyebrow, tilting her head. "Can I help you, Congresswoman?" Without a word, AOC slammed the folder on the desk in front of her. The smack echoed. "Before you go on air with another soundbite," AOC said, voice low but piercing, "read this, every page, because your numbers on renewable energy are not just wrong, they're dangerous." The moment froze. Karoline's hand hovered near the folder but didn't touch it. AOC leaned in slightly. "Read this before you speak." Silence. No laughter now. Just a dozen phones suddenly held a little higher. The kind of silence that cameras love. And then AOC turned and walked away without looking back. Karoline stood frozen, the corners of her mouth twitching between defiance and disbelief. She glanced down at the folder, then up at the press balcony. Someone was already tweeting. She knew it. And she wasn't going to let AOC steal the spotlight without a fight. But in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she had no words. Karoline Leavitt finally touched the folder. She pulled it toward her slowly, flipping the flap open with one carefully manicured fingernail. Her colleagues leaned in, curious. Inside was a thick stack of printed pages, charts, legislative drafts, congressional hearing transcripts, even handwritten annotations in red ink. And clipped on top was a post-it note. AOC's handwriting was unmistakable. "Facts don't care about your slogans." A. Karoline rolled her eyes and laughed softly, but it was the kind of laugh meant to conceal unease. "Is this supposed to intimidate me?" she said, glancing at a nearby camera. But even as she spoke, her hand trembled ever so slightly. She looked up. AOC was gone from view, now surrounded by other Democrats, casually flipping through her tablet like nothing had happened. It made Karoline angrier. Calm was not AOC's brand today. Precision was. Karoline snapped the folder shut and stood. "Fine," she muttered. "If she wants a debate, I'll give her one." Within minutes, her team had booked her on a popular afternoon political broadcast. They'd prepped her with talking points, defensive rhetoric, and quick counters. But, as the red light on the camera turned on, and the host welcomed her to the segment, Karoline opened her mouth and froze. Because sitting directly across the panel was AOC. No pre-warning, no schedule conflict, just AOC, smiling faintly, that same calm fire in her eyes. "Congresswoman Leavitt," the host said, "I believe you've reviewed the report Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez gave you this morning. Care to respond?" Karoline's smile tightened. "Well, AOC leaned forward, still silent, letting her stare do the talking. The host looked between them. The silence was pressure, the air electric. Then Karoline spoke again, this time sharper. I think what we saw this morning was a theatrical stunt by someone who'd rather grandstand than govern. AOC finally broke her silence. Theatrics? I gave you facts. You just don't like what they say. Cameras zoomed in, and just like that, the real showdown began. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Karoline snapped, her voice tighter now. I think it's rich to hear about facts from someone whose economic plan reads like a fantasy novel. The host's eyebrows lifted. This was no longer a policy debate. It was war with microphones. AOC didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, crossed one leg over the other, and smiled with just enough control to seem dangerous. If my plan is fantasy, yours is a horror story, AOC said coolly. One where the poor pay the price while billionaires cash out. Karoline's eyes narrowed. You love to weaponize outrage, don't you? That's your brand. Emotion over economics. No, AOC replied calmly. It's called caring. Something your votes suggest you're unfamiliar with. The studio crowd gasped softly. The host jumped in, trying to rein in the temperature. Let's bring this back to the report. Congresswoman Leavitt, did you find any factual inaccuracies? Karoline hesitated. A beat too long. Well, she started, some of her projections are speculative, based on climate models that have been questioned. AOC pounced. Questioned by who? Oil lobbyists? Or the same scientists warning us we're running out of time? The control room started flashing alerts. Viewer count was spiking, comments flooding in, hashtags trending. Karoline straightened up. What's dangerous is using fear to push policies that crush small businesses and rural economies. That's what you're doing. No, AOC said, voice sharpening. What's dangerous is pretending inaction is neutral. That silence isn't a choice. That the people losing their homes to floods and fires aren't real. I represent them. Who do you represent, Karoline? The studio went still. Not a sound. The host opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Karoline stood up. She didn't storm off. She didn't shout. But the message was clear. This wasn't a retreat. It was the beginning of something far messier. And the cameras didn't blink once. Karoline stood, but she didn't leave. Instead, she took 2 steps away from the desk, turned, and faced the panel. Her eyes locked on AOC's. If you want to fight, she said, microphone still live, don't hide behind curated reports and Twitter threads. Say it plain. Say it here. AOC tilted her head. Calm. Calculated. I've been saying it, she replied. You just haven't been listening. Karoline raised her voice. Oh, I've been listening. I've been watching you sell fear to Gen Z, wrap socialism in buzzwords, and convince an entire generation that hard work is oppression. The host tried to speak, but the noise level was surging. AOC leaned forward slowly, elbows on the desk. You don't get to lecture me on hard work. I waited tables while you were being fast-tracked through conservative internships. Don't confuse privilege with perseverance. The audience reacted audibly now. There were murmurs, even a few claps. Karoline's jaw clenched. But she stayed composed. I represent people who feel forgotten by this city, she said, who are tired of being shamed for not living up to your version of progress. AOC's tone hardened. And I represent people who are tired of being crushed by yours. There was a pause, just long enough for both to realize the whole country was watching. Not just the viewers at home, but journalists, politicians, campaign managers. This was no longer about policy. It was narrative warfare. Suddenly, the studio director spoke into the host's earpiece. We have 3 analysts waiting to weigh in. Bring them in, now. The host nodded. Ladies, hold your thoughts. We're bringing in some voices to offer perspective. Split screen. 3 windows lit up. A former Democratic strategist, a Republican senator, and, surprise, a climate scientist. It wasn't over. It was just multiplying. The battlefield had gone national. The screen split into 4. Top left, the studio with AOC and Karoline. Top right, Senator William Crane, Republican from Texas. Bottom left, Dr. Maya Lewis, a climate scientist from MIT. Bottom right, Vanessa Cortez, a Democratic strategist and former aide to President Obama. The host's voice cut through the digital chorus. We're now joined by 3 guests to add some perspective. Senator Crane, let's start with you. Who do you think is winning this argument? Crane chuckled, a deep Southern drawl coating every syllable. Winning? This isn't a debate. It's a Broadway play. AOC's trying to make Karoline look heartless, and Karoline's trying not to blink. But the truth? Neither of them is talking about jobs. That's what my constituents care about. Karoline nodded slightly. A small victory. But Vanessa Cortez jumped in. With all due respect, Senator, climate change is an economic issue. Every flood, every fire, every hurricane, it costs billions. What AOC is saying isn't performance, it's urgency. AOC didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on the monitor, letting the world speak for her. Then Dr. Maya Lewis added weight. The report Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez gave isn't theoretical. It's based on peer-reviewed data. The projections are dire, but accurate. Denial doesn't delay the consequences. It accelerates them. Karoline sat up straighter. I'm not denying science. I'm questioning the cost. The cost of wrecking industries, displacing workers, collapsing rural economies. AOC finally spoke. And what about the cost of doing nothing? Who pays for that, Karoline? The screen flashed. Trending now. Hashtag AOC versus Karoline. Hashtag Capital Clash. Hashtag Read Before You Speak. The host leaned in. Congresswoman Leavitt, do you regret how you responded this morning when AOC gave you that folder? Karoline hesitated. Live on air. Millions watching. And then she smiled. I regret not slamming it right back. The room exploded. Half gasps, half applause. The kind of moment that cable news loops for hours. AOC smiled too. But hers had teeth. Next time, she said calmly, bring your own folder. The battle had just entered overtime. The commercial break ended, and cameras cut back to the studio. But something had changed. When the viewers returned, they saw Karoline Leavitt holding a binder. Thicker, shinier, and labeled in bold print. The real costs. The host blinked in surprise. Congresswoman Leavitt, what's that? Karoline smiled with practiced control. Since Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez likes props, I thought I'd bring one of my own. This binder contains case studies, economic impact reports, and testimonials from communities destroyed by overregulation and federal overreach. AOC didn't flinch. I don't need props, she replied coolly. I brought data. You brought marketing. Karoline opened the binder, flipping deliberately to a marked page. This is from a factory in Indiana that shut down after a Green New Deal mandate passed at the state level. Hundreds laid off. Families displaced. AOC didn't look at the binder. She looked straight into the camera. And here's the footage, she said. The screen cut. Suddenly, a video played. Floods in Louisiana, wildfires in Arizona, drought maps overlaid with demographic data. The kind of visuals that don't just inform, they haunt. When it ended, the studio fell into an eerie silence. Then AOC turned back to Karoline. You talk about families displaced. What about the ones with no home left to return to? Karoline fired back. And who's going to pay for your plan? Single moms? Farmers? Truckers? AOC didn't miss a beat. How about we start with the oil companies who've been profiting off the planet's collapse? Boom! Twitter went into meltdown mode. Screenshots, hashtags, clips circulating like wildfire. The host jumped in again, sensing the tension. Ladies, we're seeing record-breaking viewership right now. Let me ask each of you, what happens after tonight? AOC smiled faintly. We write policy. Karoline responded just as sharply. We write a new future. The studio audience erupted. No one was leaving. No one dared blink. And for the first time in years, Capitol Hill had a debate people actually wanted to watch. The lights above the studio dimmed slightly, replaced by a cooler hue. Not by accident, but by production design. The atmosphere needed to reflect the shift. This was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. The host took a breath. We've received over 120,000 live comments. One of the top-voted questions reads, if your vision wins, what does America look like in 10 years? He turned to Karoline Leavitt. She folded her hands and paused before speaking. In 10 years, she said, we'll have an economy that rewards work again. Our cities will be safer. Our schools will be focused on learning, not ideology. And most importantly, we'll protect our energy independence. That's the America I'm fighting for. She looked directly into the lens. And yes, that means saying no to expensive fantasies. Because freedom isn't free, and someone always has to pay for utopias. There was polite applause, measured, loyal. Then the host turned to AOC. And you, Congresswoman? AOC stood slowly, breaking protocol. She didn't wait for a cue. In 10 years, she began, we'll finally have clean air in every zip code. We'll stop measuring success by GDP and start measuring it by health, justice, and dignity. She paced once, eyes burning bright beneath the studio lights. No kid will skip breakfast so an oil exec can buy another yacht. No woman will choose between paying rent and affording insulin. And no lawmaker, Republican or Democrat, will be allowed to ignore the climate crisis and call it leadership. The room tensed. Karoline leaned forward. That's a lovely dream. Too bad reality doesn't work that way. AOC stopped walking. Reality is broken, Karoline. Some of us are here to fix it. Others are just cashing in on it. The audience gasped, not for the line itself, but for what it implied. The host raised a hand. We need to go to break. A producer's voice crackled in his earpiece. Too late. We're trending in 74 countries. This wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a defining moment in America's future. The studio's energy had shifted from heated to volatile. Karoline leaned in, elbows on the desk, tone lower than before. Almost intimate. You know what bothers me the most, Alexandria? It's not the theatrics. It's that every time someone disagrees with you, you paint them as the villain in your utopia. AOC didn't blink. And every time someone shows you a mirror, you smash it. Gasps. Karoline stood up, her microphone brushing her collar. Don't talk to me about mirrors. I grew up in a small town where people worked 2 jobs just to survive. I didn't have a fancy campaign launch in the Bronx. I earned my seat without hashtags or staged protests. AOC stood, too. The host signaled to cut to break. Too late. You earned your seat, AOC said sharply. On the back of fear. Fear of change. Fear of truth. And now you sit here, claiming the moral high ground, while ignoring the very crises swallowing our country whole. Karoline fired back, her voice trembling from both fury and restraint. You weaponize compassion. You make every issue black and white. That's not leadership. It's propaganda. The studio lights flared as cameras adjusted to their movement. Neither woman was backing down. Security shifted nervously off camera. The audience was dead silent. No applause, no murmurs, just stunned stillness. Then, a producer whispered something in the host's earpiece. He cleared his throat. "We've just received a phone-in. Senator Lindsay Coleman is joining us live from Washington. Senator, your thoughts?" A man's voice boomed through the audio feed. "This isn't a debate anymore. It's a civil war on live television." The screen split. Karoline on the left, AOC on the right. The nation watched. Twitter trended. "This is not just TV, AOCV's Karoline. Just civil words. War." Karoline leaned in one last time. "You don't scare me." AOC stepped closer. "I don't need to." Silence. Then the host whispered, "We'll be right back." But everyone knew. As the screen faded in from black, the camera slowly zoomed out, revealing not just AOC and Karoline, but now a panel of flashing monitors behind them. Live tweets, state senator reactions, campus watch parties. The studio had become a nerve center for American tension. The host tried to regain control. "Congresswomen, we have an urgent question from a live viewer in Michigan. He says, if both of you represent America, where does that leave the rest of us?" Karoline answered quickly. "It leaves them with a choice between chaos and clarity, between emotional outrage and responsible leadership." AOC interrupted. "Between repeating the past and rewriting the future." Karoline glared. "Number between fantasy and accountability." A voice came from the studio audience, unauthorized. A young woman stood, her badge showing she was part of the youth internship program. "I'm sorry," she said, eyes darting between producers, "but can I say something?" The room froze. The host paused, then nodded. The intern stepped forward. "I used to think you both were heroes, but now I think maybe we don't need heroes. We need adults." A hush fell over the room. AOC's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded with unexpected respect. Karoline crossed her arms, visibly uncomfortable for the first time. The intern continued. "People like me don't care about your Twitter followers or mic drop moments. We want air we can breathe, schools we can trust, streets we can walk safely. Who's going to give us that?" No one spoke. The camera panned out slowly. Outside, protests were forming. On both sides. One banner read, "We are the generation watching." Another, "This isn't a debate, it's a deadline." Inside, AOC broke the silence. "Then maybe it's time we start listening." Karoline didn't speak. She just looked down, at her notes, her microphone, the binder she had brought. The host stood. "Ladies and gentlemen, this broadcast has shattered every record we've seen. But more importantly, it's left us with one question. What happens tomorrow?" The lights dimmed, but the fire had only just been lit. The broadcast ended, but the silence didn't. The studio lights went dim, replaced by amber glows from laptops and phones across the nation. The headlines were already forming. AOC and Karoline Leavitt ignite a political firestorm on live TV. Debate or divide? America reacts to explosive broadcast. Gen Z intern becomes unexpected voice of reason. Inside the studio, AOC sat motionless in her chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on nothing. Karoline stood by the desk, flipping through her binder, though not reading a word. No makeup team entered. No stage manager approached. There was nothing to fix. The host returned to the center of the stage. "We're off air," he said quietly. AOC looked up. "Number, we're never off air anymore." Karoline didn't disagree. Backstage, producers huddled around data. 18 million live viewers. Over 150 million impressions in under an hour. The White House had already issued a statement urging for civility. The Speaker of the House called for focus. But on the streets, there was only noise. Outside the Capitol, protests swelled into the early morning. College students, factory workers, single mothers, veterans, marching for wildly different futures. Signs clashed. So did chants. One said, "Let the women lead." Another screamed, "Pick a side or get out of the way." In the aftermath, it wasn't clear who won. And maybe that was the point. AOC released a video that night, in a quiet room, no production crew. "I stand by every word," she said, "but I'm also ready to listen to the words I didn't want to hear." Karoline posted a photo, her microphone still clipped on, captioned, "The truth isn't always loud, but it never backs down." The nation waited, for polls, for responses, for the next spark. But deep down, most Americans weren't waiting. They were choosing, not just between two women, but between two visions. And they understood, perhaps for the first time in years. It was their move. Two voices, one nation, and a debate that cracked open more than just policies. It exposed the soul of a country divided. Whether you stand with AOC, with Karoline, or somewhere in between, one thing is clear. America is not just watching. It's deciding. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts, because this conversation isn't over.